All right. Hey, thanks for joining us here once again at the Gill Athletics Connections podcast. I'm really excited about this one. I think I say that for all of them, full disclosure. But this one is going to be a lot of fun for a couple of reasons. One is today's guest is just a dear friend of mine, personally and professionally, but also really a super interesting character here today. Today we have with us Blake Boldon from the Drake Relays. He's the Drake Relays director. Blake, thanks for joining us today.
Hey, Mike. Yeah, thanks for having me on.
This will be audio only. I wish they could see you right now, though. You are in full quarantine mode with this full beard and mustache, and it seems like are you working from home?
Yeah. I've been working from home since essentially I think March 19th, maybe. I've gone by the office a handful of times, maybe actually only 2 or 3 times, just to pick up. I mean, the day after I started working from home, I had to go back because I'd realized I'd left my computer charger at the office. So I just went by and picked up the absolute necessities on day 2. And then I went back, actually I think it was 24, 25 days later to then, had a greater realization that I would be here in a little bit longer term.
Right.
So then I went back and grabbed letterhead, some more things to really create the Drake Relays home office, so to speak.
Yeah. I same thing. I just picked up my office chair yesterday. I've been here a month and just not loving my chair, my home chair at all. And finally was like, you know what? Those office chairs are office chairs for a reason. I need to grab that and bring it to the house. I love that you were all set, ready to work, and then you forgot you were on limited time. You didn't have your charger for your
Right, yeah. Well, that's how quickly. I mean, we worked hard to put together a thoughtful and comprehensive postponement announcement, and so that process took us several days because the Drake Relays, certainly there was no choice in 2020 to do anything other than postpone. But when we have road races, that 5K, 10K, half marathon that include more than 4,000 participants, the Grand Blue Mile that includes between 3,000 and 4,000 adult and family participants, in addition to the USATF 1 Mile Championships and a mascot race and so many more. Like that night has 7 or 8 races, including one that includes 700 elementary school kids. So road races, Grand Blue Mile, the vault at Capitol Square in downtown Des Moines, which I know you're familiar with, and then high school, college, professional elements to the Drake Relays and partnerships with organizations like U.S. Paralympics, Iowa, or Special Olympics of Iowa, number of other organizations that we partner with just for the track meet. Then on top of that, we needed to make sure that we were creating messaging for the students because the Drake Relays is the largest student-run festival in the state of Iowa, with a concert, street painting, like a week-long celebration that really functions as Drake University's homecoming. So then once you think of those terms, you also know we had to work with our alumni office to be sure that they were prepared for alumni questions. So And that's not to even include the beautiful Bulldog contest and how we were going to address that with the director of that event. So all of those elements, students, alumni, community, and then of course, athletes, coaches, agents, vendors, all of that to have a consistent messaging, an FAQ, and it took us a couple days after we knew that the postponement would be necessary to be sure that messaging was consistent and coherent and addressed any possible concern. So when we finished that, it went out in a press statement and an email statement and those things at about 4:00 on Wednesday, the 18th of March. Then the local TV reached out and wanted to come by the office and did 3 or 4 TV interviews. And then I was ready to go home. So when I left the office that day, I didn't necessarily leave with the intention of not coming back for 7 or 8 weeks. I left with the intention of, I have to get out of here. Yeah. And I just grabbed my computer and my bag that I used to take to work with me every day. And then I got home and I worked the next day. And about 5:00, I realized 2 things. 1, I needed a computer charger. And then 2, oh no, I haven't been to the store in a month. I gotta go to the store. I have nothing here. And then that was my first real, because I'd been in a work bubble, not only with the postponement announcement that we just addressed, but leading into that, on March 11th, we announced a new presenting sponsorship of the Drake Relays, and we announced a new status on the World Athletics Continental Tour. We attained silver level status. So really changing how the Drake Relays plays a role on the Olympic qualifying process. And it's a new procedure that was put in place for the 2020 Olympics. So we had this big press conference with 100 people, and that was March 11th. And that was the culmination of, full speed work for weeks to finalize a contract, build the PR, figure all that. And then once we hit that announcement, the very next day is when the NCAA, began that postponement, or really maybe within 48 hours of our announcement is when, the world turned upside down. So certainly very happy that we had the opportunity to celebrate our presence on the World Athletics Continental Tour and our tremendous support from Extreme, powered by MediaCom, our new presenting sponsor. But, even now that kind of seems like a dream that in the span of a week, we went from probably one of the biggest announcements in Drake Relays history, which spans 11 decades, to the very next week postponing the event for the very first time in 11 decades. So a pretty roller coaster week, and still just coming up from air from that after having commemorated the originally scheduled dates last week.
Yeah, unfortunately, we're still on that roller coaster. Every day, something, a new twist, a new turn, a new dip, a new dive. I do like, with our sport, for the companies that invest into supporting this great sport of track and field, to make sure we give proper shout outs. You mentioned them real briefly there. Give us the name of that new sponsor for the Drake Relays. We need to give them a public shout out for supporting the greatest track meet in the country here.
Well, thanks, Mike. So the company is MediaCom. They're the 5th largest cable and internet provider in the U.S. They do a lot of business here in Iowa and other parts of the country, but they're committed to the communities here in Iowa. They've branded it with one of their products, Extreme, which is their internet service. So when they market that, this is how we started building the relationship. When they market it, they're very explicit in saying faster is better. And that's like a tagline that they use in marketing. Well, of course, athletes.
Perfect for track.
That's right. Athletes, faster is better. Maybe not so much for the throwing events, but certainly if you're faster in rotation, it's certainly faster doesn't hurt. So faster is better, and that certainly is. We haven't really leaned into that yet, but we've only
just announced it.
Yeah, but then so they do the internet as a primary product, but then of course here in Iowa, and it's a local cable access channel essentially called MediaCom 22. Then I think may even extend over to Champaign-Urbana and Mahomet, and kind of through a regional reach, mostly small towns. Doesn't extend into Chicago, but certainly does grab a lot of Illinois. And so, long story short, I mentioned that to say the week of the Drake Relays, great partnership with USATF in this regard, and Runner Space. Everybody on their team. Ross Krempley, their CEO, just terrific partner and very generous in allowing us to take all of the 2019 content from the Drake Relays and then rebroadcast it and repackage it on the local cable. So that then if you lived in Iowa particular, or rural parts that were immediately adjacent to Iowa, so between where I live and where you live, like the Quad Cities.
And
so some of those areas, it might have shown near Mahomet and near Champaign-Urbana. I don't think the intention was for it not to go that far based on our conversation with Runner Space and USATF, but for MediaCom 22 to have that valuable content, but then also to give Iowa the chance to really recognize the event and celebrate it, and our near market where most of our ticket holders live.
All right. Well, that's awesome for MediaCom to step up and support the Drake Relays. And God bless, we're finding out how even more important. We already knew internet was important, but with our current stay-at-home area, boy, we know how important that really is right now. So just want to give a shout out to the companies that sponsor and support the sport that we have. So that's awesome for those guys. That was a great update on the Drake Relays, and I said, you caught me there when I said the best track meet in the country. I have had a soft spot for the Drake Relays for a long time. It was the first big meet that I ever went to as a coach, and I still remember the how I kind of fell in love with the Drake Relays. I was over on the bend part just past the start line, and the invitational mile was up, and Steve Scott was trying to become, I think he was trying to become the first 40-year-old to break 4 minutes. And full disclosure here, I am not a distance guy at all. I was a sprints, hurdles, jumps coach. But it became interesting to me to watch this guy try to break 4 minutes for the 40. Well, he ends up not making, I don't know what he ran, but he didn't hit the goal of sub 4. But the fans were so appreciative of the effort. It was a standing ovation. And I remember I stood up and I started clapping, and that's when it came full scope to me. I was able, because of where I was sitting, I was able to see the entire stand, sold out, of course, because that's what Drake Relays does on Saturdays, and see everybody standing up, standing ovation, however many people are in the stands, thousands and thousands of people, for this, this is going to sound harsh, but this failed attempt at a sub 4. And that's when it hit me like, holy cow, this is a big deal here. Like, track is huge. And I have done everything I can to make every Drake Relays since then, man. Just fell in love.
Yeah.
And I know
that's a great story. Yeah, I mean, I think
yeah.
what makes Drake Relays special, and maybe even all of track, but it really comes to light in Des Moines, is that the fans absolutely celebrate the winners. They absolutely celebrate the records. But as much as anything, they celebrate the effort.
Yes.
That effort is what really brings the crowd to their feet, And we've got a rich history of world-class announcing, Jim Duncan.
Yes.
And I think if you come and visit Drake Stadium during the Drake Relays, and then you go to a lot of other meets, and not naming any others by name, but your typical track meet, and then you hear how current in the modern 2020 and beyond, and over the last 14 or 15 years, I think it is, Mike J, and how he brings it to life, that passion, that very recognizable voice. He got his start at Drake Stadium. Prior to that, it was Tom Crochelle, who is very knowledgeable, works at Iowa State, and did a wonderful job after Jim Duncan, the legendary public address announcer that did it for many, many years. Brilliant guy that knew so much in an era where research was a lot harder, in the 70s and 80s, 60s, 70s, 80s. So that's part of it. And then that really brings the crowd to life, and they feel an intimate relationship with those athletes. And then reciprocally, those athletes feel an intimate relationship with their fan base.
Now, if you're listening so far, it's clear you can hear the passion from Blake about the Drake Relays. But, you may be saying to yourself, well, of course he has passion. He's the director of Drake Relays. Interestingly enough, and we're going to get in our Wayback Machine here, Blake, and go back to high school, which, we're not going to talk about age, but it was a while ago.
Yeah.
So you actually, Drake Relays is not a job for you. It's a culture for you. And what I mean by that is you actually grew up in the state of Iowa running track and competing at the Drake Relays.
Well, to some degree, trying to compete at the Drake Relays.
Well, let's start with your high school career. You're a miler by trade. Were you a miler when you first started getting into track? And why did you even choose track over other sports?
I mean, when I was in 7th and 8th grade, I just did all the sports. Like, just was a sports kid, I mean, when I was 8 or 10 years old, I probably thought I was going to be a professional baseball player, loving the Cubs, just love sports. So, I was on the football team, which, probably weighed 88 pounds or something like that.
I am shocked by that, Blake. I did not know that.
Yeah. So, in the school, it's like, well, you have 4 seasons. You do football in the summer, in the fall, basketball in the winter, and then track in the spring, and then baseball in the summer. So I did that. And in track, I definitely didn't. In 7th and 8th grade, I was not a miler. I was a 400-meter runner because I didn't really see myself running farther than that. and I wasn't fast enough to run anything shorter than that.
Hmm.
400 when you're 88 pounds and 13 years old or whatever it was, that's might as well have been distance or mid distance. And at that point, there's no chance it was under 60. I mean, just no chance.
Oh, right.
Yeah. And I mean, I don't know, maybe 65, could have been 70 for all I remember now. But the main thing I remember is when I was in 8th grade, I still wasn't traveling. Like I didn't get to travel to the big meets in 8th grade.
Mm-hmm.
Instead, I was going with like essentially the B team with the 7th graders and not the best 7th graders, because the best 7th graders got to go with the 8th graders.
Right.
And so that's my track and field story of like, man, I started, and then by the time I finished 8th grade, I had thought maybe I would be a pitcher or something in baseball, but I just wasn't strong enough. Like I couldn't throw the ball from second base to home plate on a high school baseball field. Just a little kid, like little scrawny, weak kid that puberty hadn't hit and I hadn't developed into anything. So then I was like, well, what was I going to do in high school? I was not going to play football. I would have got destroyed. So I was a football manager and ran cross country because I was like, well, I want to do something. And when I was in 8th grade, the high school cross country team had 2 boys at my high school. 2 boys on the whole team.
Wait.
So I looked at it as
– is that because track wasn't popular, or did you go to like a school of 20 kids?
No, I graduated with like 100 kids. Like there's just we're not from an athletic town necessarily.
Wow.
And distance running and track and field are certainly not it's not part of our culture necessarily. Like, yeah. I mean, I could tell a lot of stories about that little town. Like then I started running. I became a runner over time. And there were like 2 runners in the whole town. People that would actually go out, put on running shoes and go for a run. But when I was in 8th grade, I looked at our high school roster and I knew that there with only 2 kids, I was like, I'm going to get a varsity letter.
I'm getting a letter.
I'm varsity, baby. Like, but I know that there's 5 that make it to the varsity at least. I'm going to be varsity as a freshman. So I started running a little bit. And my sister was on my older sister was on the girls team, and the girls team was a little bit better. And, and she graduated. So it wasn't like I was going to have to be on the same team as my sister. So I went in and started running. And then, I ran 19:11 for 5K my freshman year. I don't know. I always remember it because I was like, wow, that's pretty good.
Mm-hmm.
Like that's pretty good. Which that's not really that great for a varsity level girl. I mean, to be honest, but I was a varsity level boy as a freshman, ran 19:11 and thought, maybe I'm a runner now.
Right.
Maybe I'm a runner. And then started working hard and just trained a lot. And then by the end, my senior year, I ran 16:06, and certainly had grown a few inches and got, trained a lot, which trained a lot by my standard was 20 miles a week. I thought I was killing myself. I mean, and in the weight room and doing some plyometrics and, doing what I thought was a lot of hard work. But kids these days, they have the advantage of certainly podcasts, really smart and educated coaches. Not to say my coaches weren't wonderful, just saying that their access to people like you or to, Coach Holloway from Florida or whoever, it wasn't the same in the 90s as it is now.
Right.
And I remember, I mean, you share these memories, I'm sure, of when you were a coach or an athlete in the 90s and you wanted to find out what your competition was doing. Not in terms of training, like how many miles they were running or what kind of weights they're lifting or what kind of drills they're doing, just even the results. You had to open up the paper and flip to the very back to the sports roundup and find like tiny fine print just to find the winner's name and the winner's time.
Just the winner. Yeah. You didn't even get 1, 2, 3. You only got winners. If you got anything, you only got winners. Yeah.
Right. And so there was just this absence of awareness. So I thought I was good. My senior year, I wasn't ever good enough to get into the Drake relays. I just didn't qualify. I just wasn't especially a good athlete. There was not a no natural talent that anyone would have looked at and said, wow, that guy is going to be an athlete someday.
I am shocked that you did not qualify for the Drake relays. So if you didn't qualify, because I thought you had done you ended up going to school at Missouri State, a really good program, and got real good there. But so did you not qualify for state either?
My junior year, I qualified in both the 1600 and the 3200 and finished like 9th maybe. And So I was not fast, but I'd say I was like hyper competitive. No,
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 not even
hyper
steady.
competitive. Not even steady. Just like if I was in a race, I was racing to win, or I was racing in the front.
Mhm.
Like, and so where my times weren't great, by senior year, I won 20 straight races, but just didn't have that higher level competition. We didn't travel much. They're all super local. And I remember my high school athletic director always joked with me. He wasn't the track coach, but he followed it. And he just like would see me at school the next day and pat me on the back. Oh, our 30-point man right here, because you run the 3,200, the 1,600, and the 800, and you go score 30 points every Tuesday and every Friday, or every Tuesday and every Thursday.
Yeah, Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday. Yep,
Yeah,
absolutely.
and we didn't have a lot of big Saturday invitationals, at least not at my school. So not a lot of that next level competition. I mean, I remember when we would go to one or two big meets, and I might see someone who'd run at the state meet the year before. That was a big thing. Like to see somebody that was one of the other people I knew that was in the top in the state. That was a big deal to see somebody like that. But I always wanted to run at the Drake Relays in high school, but the state meet is held in Drake Stadium, so that was really special. I ran twice as a junior, meaning the 1,600 and the 3,200, and then as a senior in the 3,200 and the 1,600. And this is the story that I used to tell a lot, and especially when I was recruiting, and talking with high school kids, because in the 3,200. I was in second place with 100 meters to go. Thought I was having this big breakthrough my senior year, and then two guys just went right past me. And,
Oh,
and I remember and I have this article still. My mom has it in a frame. You actually went and got the original print when newspapers actually used to keep the metal print.
yeah.
So we've got that, and it's framed. It's a really thoughtful gift that she got for me. But that article, I did an interview with the local sports writer about, man, I don't know. I just got out kicked in the 3,200. These guys are all really fast. I don't know how I'm going to kick with them tomorrow in the 1,600. I'm more because I thought I was more of a distance runner, not a miler. And I had just gotten out kicked. Well, then the next day, however it happened. Well, and actually, I do remember very clearly standing there at the start. You're there, and it's a packed stadium. And it's like the biggest race in my life at that point. The nerves that come with it. And I remember the anxiety and the stress of that moment. And I heard the public address announcer, who was Tom Crochelle at the time. I ended up becoming friends with him later. He said, and he said me by name in school, and said that I'm the top returner. And I'm like, well, at least one guy thinks I can win this. And then I ended up winning the race, just pulling it out, and had a big kick.
Wow.
Yeah, really a breakthrough race. Actually, that day in that race, I ran a 7-second PR to win the race.
That's
Went
huge in the mile. Holy cow.
Yeah, 4:34 to 4:27 in that one race. So, and then that gave me increased confidence. Called up the coach at Missouri State. At that point, still really hadn't committed, because I mean, let's be honest, even in the 90s, there's nobody that's lining up to recruit a 4:34 miler. Let's go. There's a lot of those. And Drake had recruited me, Sterling Martin, who I'm still good friends with. He recruited me to Drake. Larry Wazorek at Iowa had called me more because he's a good man and a nice person, not because I really belonged in the Big Ten at that point in time. And he knew that's where I wanted to go. I wanted to go to Iowa. I grew up a Hawkeye fan. It was what I wanted to do, but it wasn't going to be right for me. Not at that point in time, because I would have been running to the ground as a 4:34 miler that was running 20 miles a week. It's just it's too much. So I was really fortunate that my first freshman year at Missouri State, there's my dogs, and I told them they're going to bark here or there for no good reason. They're just going to hear something.
They just wanted to make sure that they were on the podcast. That was their whole goal.
Yes, that's it. So I'm sorry, Mike. If you hear a squeaker, it's because I keep one by my computer, and then I squeak it, and then they come running in and calm down. It's like some Pavlovian dog training.
Pavlov, yeah.
Yeah, so we've done some dog training since I had to work from home, because they've interrupted not just this call, but every call.
Every call.
Yeah.
When you work from home, you have to take into account everything.
Yeah. I mean, yeah.
from home.
I'm not having to teach any homeschool kids, being
Yeah,
a single person. I can't imagine parents that are dealing with that right now, but
tough.
dealing with these two dogs, I've learned to cope.
That's right.
Yeah.
So you go to Missouri State.
Yeah.
What was your goal going to Missouri State, professionally and academically? Meaning, what did you choose to major in? Did you think about being a coach at that time, or were you thinking something completely opposite?
Yeah, I studied math education, and then even before I graduated, I'd picked up a minor in coaching, and had actually we have at Missouri State. There's a lab school on campus called Greenwood Laboratory School, and like schools across the country, maybe it's Eastern Michigan and Northern Iowa, Missouri State. They started in the early 20th centuries as a normal school
Right.
intended to teach like education. So to teach teachers. And so that was what Missouri State started as.
Right.
And then and that's not why I chose Missouri State, but my parents were both teachers, and it was more just to me, it was like the natural progression in life. Like you go to high school, you go to college, and then you teach. I don't know. It just seemed natural. So I
Well,
got a degree in mathematics and education, and then coaching as a minor. And at that lab school, I had done coaching. Jerry Masterson, who was a wonderful, like a world-class middle distance runner in the early 80s. He was the head track coach, and I was fortunate that he gave me an opportunity to be an assistant one semester while I was redshirting. And I had the flexibility. My college coach at that time, Houston Franks, was very generous in saying, yeah, since you're redshirting, and I was a walk-on, so there was some additional flexibility there, that he gave me that flexibility that on the days that weren't our workouts, I could do my mileage run on my own and go to practice. Found that balance just for one season to kind of get some of that experience. And I knew that coaching would be something I'd want to be involved in down the road.
so shout out to Houston Franks, by the way, who has his own episode. He beat you to the punch, Blake. He was on the Go
As he
Athletic
tends to do.
podcast. He has seniority. He was your coach. He deserves that, right? In fact, owe a lot to Houston for you and I. That's how you and I got plugged in together many, many years ago now. It's kind of amazing.
Yeah, that would have been probably, maybe 15 years ago or more, but,
Yeah,
something like that.
well, yeah, maybe a little bit more. It was before I came to Gill, and I've been here for almost 14 years. So yeah,
Yeah.
it just means we're getting old is all that really means. I think. Now, so you obviously progressed at Missouri State because you ended up going into a post-collegiate career as well. I hope this embarrasses you a little bit. You shouldn't be, but you're humble enough that this will embarrass you. You were the 287th American to run sub 4. That's what trackandfieldnews.com tells me.
Huh.
That is
There's probably been 287 since then. There's probably
first of
about that.
all, math major, that was really good. I looked that up too. I was like, well, how many has there been as of, well, I say today, there hasn't been any lately, unfortunately.
Right.
But we have now for American citizens, we have had 558. So that was really good. That was pretty close to double there, but you are 287. That is a phenomenal number when you think about in the eons of time, you were the 287th American. I could not find the world list. I wanted to know where did you sit on the all-time world list. I couldn't find that anywhere on the Wild Wild Webs there. But that just impresses the ever-living snot out of me that that only 286 people before you was able to do this monumental thing. That's amazing. So that was in 2007. So that was after you had graduated. That was during your post-collegiate. What kind of marks were you coming out of Missouri State? I know you're a many-time conference champion. Fast forward now, you've now been inducted into the Missouri State Hall of Fame. Congratulations, by the way. That's a big deal.
Thank you.
And I'd like to think that your introduction to the Hall of Fame there was not just athletically, but what you have done for the sport of track and field, but also as you've represented Missouri State as your alma mater. I mean, it's a kind of a package combination there for your induction to that Hall of Fame.
Thanks. Well, yeah, it took me a while it took a while for me to actually believe it to be true that when I first got the notification, I actually was at the coaches convention down in Orlando last December. Were we in Orlando? Yeah, the USTF CCCA convention.
Yeah.
And I got this text from my mom that she had received a voicemail from someone at Missouri State about a Hall of Fame induction. And of course, my first thought was, I know exactly which one of my college teammates is pulling a prank on me. Like,
Oh, you thought it was a
so,
prank.
oh, for sure, 100%. And so I started texting around, just, hey, how'd you, like probably first question I asked him, hey, how'd you get my mom's number? And he then of course thinks I'm headed in a different direction, something, but my 72-year-old poor sweet mom has to, like, so I asked him enough questions to discern that it really wasn't him. And then I was like, oh, this might be real. And then it was fun. It was really nice because Houston was there. Houston Franks, who you referenced. So I called one of my dear friends and teammates and a guy that I've stayed in touch with and shared the news with him. And then, like, literally I was on the phone with my friend. And as I was on the phone with my friend in the lobby of the hotel there, Houston got off the elevator and I had texted him, hey, I'm in the lobby. I've got something to share with you. And so Houston was the second person, I guess,
awesome.
Just by a matter of a few seconds I got to share it with. And then he and Megan and the kids, we went, and they had dinner while I just kind of enjoyed it. He had some family time and I crashed family time and just, we shot the breeze and caught up. And, that's probably, the induction ceremony was really terrific. My high school coach drove all the way from Iowa down to Missouri.
Wow.
My mom and one of my sisters went, my younger sister. And then, man, it was maybe all told, probably 80 people that went at one point or another for the weekend. People a couple people from Texas, one from Colorado, one from Memphis, a group from Indianapolis. Yeah, I mean, in part because I encouraged them and, invited them and asked them, but also we haven't had a reason to get together because our men's track and field program was cut.
Right.
Man, a decade ago, 15 years ago, 2006-ish. It's a little fuzzy in my mind, but exactly which year it was, but not long after I graduated and left. And so we don't have a reason to get back together. And, they've down at Missouri State built a new basketball arena and have poured into a new track for their women's team and have done a lot of nice things on campus. And so I just really was suggesting to some friends, like, well, if you're not going to go back now, when are you ever going to go?
Right. Yeah.
And when are we there? Most of them but me are married, and it's like, well, we don't have any more weddings to get together for. Right. So what are we waiting on? Are we waiting on funerals to start getting together?
Right. Yeah.
And so some people brought families, but it was mostly just the guys and kind of a guys weekend.
That's awesome.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun.
Well, so this is one of the many, many reasons that I love being in your circle of good friends is when someone called to tell the news that you were being introduced in the Hall of Fame, you thought it was a prank. Your humbleness was so much like, this can't be real. Me, on the other hand, I call Troy University every year and ask, is this the year I'm going to be in? That's just the difference between you and I.
No, I know better than that. No, it's more just a matter of, I know I've got friends that can be real jerks. Maybe that's it, Mike.
However you want to explain it, that's good. So obviously to be inducted into the Hall of Fame, you were a pretty good athlete. So what kind of marks were you running your senior year in college that you thought, well, man, I shouldn't hang it up just yet. I should try post-collegiately. What were you running? Were you, I assume you're a miler. You're one of our few sub-4 milers in this country. So I assume the mile did become your main event in college.
Yeah, I probably should have been more of a 3K runner or a 5K runner much earlier in my life or my career, but I was a 1,500 meter runner, primarily a mile and a 3K indoors. But I hadn't won any conference titles until my senior year. And entering my senior year, my PRs were 4:11 in the mile and let's see, outdoors for 1,500, probably 3:53. That range. They're pretty equivalent, 3:53 and 4:11. I'm pretty sure those are with 1 year to go. And I remember very clearly, like, having a conversation with our GA, Michael Jules, who's from the Caribbean, and he was partying, like he was leaving. And this is before I had 1 year of eligibility left. And it was my 5th year. So I'd done some redshirting. So I've already spent 4 years at college. And really, to go from 4:27 for 1,600 and 9:48 for 3,200 down to 4:11 and 3:53 is pretty good. I mean, that's good progression.
Absolutely.
And I remember sharing with Michael Jules and others, I'm sure, that if my last go round in this 5th year, I was able to go to 3:45 for 1,500, that I would then pursue, like, take a shot at, like, maybe try and make the Olympic trials in 2004. Like, try to continue going. If I could go from 3:53 to 3:45, that 8-second jump would keep me engaged. Well, then indoors, I caught fire and I started running pretty well. And I think it was probably my first mile race. I hadn't lost the race. I won a couple of smaller races, an 800, a 3K. And then Houston took me down to Kentucky and ran on that big old track. And Robert Gary was pacing the race for Rob Myers, who ended up running at the World Championships. He ran sub-4 that day. It was his first sub-4. I was second in 4:03. I went from 4:11 to 4:03 in one race. Yeah, that's a breakthrough. That's a big day. And I mean, there's a lot of memories from that day, certainly related primarily to my personal relationship with Houston and some wisdom he'd shared with me before the race, and the relationship we'd built over the 4 years leading up to it. But also, the school record at Missouri State at the time was 4:07. And his name was Matt Waginka, and Matt was, at that point, a really good master's level. Matt Waginka is the best guy in Springfield, and he trained with us on a regular basis, and he made sure we knew he was the best guy in Springfield, if you understand what I'm saying. So before I even was out on my spikes, one of my teammates, or maybe it was my teammates, had convinced Houston to call Waginka on his cell phone, hands me the phone to leave him a voicemail about who has the new school record. So you like to pretend that I'm humble, but I'm not entirely always. There was certainly some ego behind it, but it was primarily spite, I think, that was just calling to remind him, or to make sure he heard it directly from me, that he no longer had that school record.
That's awesome. Tell me, you still have the school record.
Well, it's easy to hold school record.
I know it drops after that, but no one came up in the year or two after you and broke it.
There were actually, in Houston's last year, and then Greg Hipp took over the program. There were some really talented kids on that team, but before they could get to that level, the program was cut. I think there were some guys on that, and then, once you get your program cut, wherever you are in your career, freshman, sophomore, it's not, so it doesn't happen at Missouri State, obviously, but then nobody really reached that level at their next stop, because it just really takes your whole life, throws it up in the air, and some guys try to continue, others just, it didn't work for them. But so I still have that record. And then I went outdoors and had a even bigger breakthrough, really. Went to Sea Ray Relays, and first 1,500 of the year. And actually, I remember this one very clearly, because early in the week, I couldn't finish a workout for whatever reason. I just didn't hit it. Didn't happen. I'm like, man, I gotta put the spikes away for a couple days. Then we drove, like, Missouri State, not a cash cow for the sport of track and field, obviously. So we're in vans, and actually, I was late to the van by 5 or 10 minutes, and probably Houston was not the kind of guy to wait for someone. If you hear what I'm saying, to this day, I'm grateful that he didn't leave me, and I think he's probably happy he didn't, because we got there, and I really didn't have an expectation that I'd have a good performance. So because I had missed what I felt like I missed the workout on Tuesday, the race was on whatever the days were, Monday, Wednesday, Friday, Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday, but I missed the first one of the week. So I got there, and I went and I ran 200s like the day before I was supposed to race. With Houston's approval, but it was my idea, because I'm like, I feel like I'm going to be way too tapered and way too down if I don't do some volume and intensity here, even though I'm racing tomorrow, because I'm not going to do it after the race so much. I probably should have planned on that. But then I went and the field was stacked. It was by far the best competitors I've ever raced. Two guys, including Dan Wilson, who is just a sub 4-minute miler and a really stud level athlete. But he and a teammate from Zap Fitness had run at World Championships in cross country 6 weeks earlier, a month earlier. So I'm like, this is my first chance. It's my first time since I've had this breakthrough and like running at an elite level, that I was going to get to run against world-class guys, or at least guys that had worn the Team USA jersey.
Right.
And, Ryan Hayden from Villanova, he was a Canadian guy. And it was a good field. And we went to the 1200, and I was kind of sitting in the pack at like 3 flat. And I just remember thinking, like, this is way too easy. I just took off and won by a lot and ran 342, and had entered the race with the PR that I'd set a PR. So it was my second 1500 of the year, because in a debut, I'd ran 351 or 352 2 weeks prior or a week prior. So a 10-second PR or more, maybe 11-second PR. I know in a span of like 8 days, I lowered the PR maybe 11 seconds. Right. And the night that I did that in Tennessee I guess I do remember, it was a Friday night, because that Friday night, it was the fastest time in the NCAA and the fastest time that year for an American. It was early season, April, and 342.73 at that point in time in 2003. That's a pretty good time.
Mm-hmm.
Ended up, I think, being the 8th fastest time in the NCAA on the season.
So you made it to nationals?
Yeah, and at nationals, I got really sick.
Oh, good job.
Yeah.
Well, we won't ask about that race then.
Yeah, didn't make the finals. Make the finals.
What's it like when you make the decision of, okay, I'm going to graduate from college, but I'm not going to stop doing track? A lot of the support goes away when you go post-collegiate. When you're a college athlete, someone's always setting your bus schedule, your training schedule, your work schedule. Everything is really regimented, doing your entry fees, etc. When you're post-collegiate, well, that all now falls on you. So what was it like now trying to earn a living, now running? And what else did you get a part-time job? Did you go into coaching? What were you doing at the same time as post-collegiate running?
Yeah, right. And so there was maybe a time where I'd consider myself a professional runner, but even then, it was not because I made it it was a professional wage. It was, I just didn't have another job.
Right.
But most of the time, I would just consider myself a post-collegiate, and I went into grad school and then was a GA in the academic services office of our athletic department. So it was the Achievement Center for Intercollegiate Athletics, and I was an academic advisor, and then pursued a master's degree. But then Houston left to return to his alma mater, Mississippi State, that next year. So I was 1 year of grad school there. When he left, I knew that my time in Springfield was done. But then so I was 2004, and I'd missed the Olympic trials, hadn't run especially well because of all the things you just identified. The first year is tough because as much as Houston showed me love and support and coaching and mentorship, it's not his job anymore. And he certainly poured into me more than I deserved, and very generously that he gave of his expertise and time and energy to help support my dream. But, in the end, it is like I'm responsible for making sure I find a meet to get to that I am entered, can get in, all of those things. You kind of serve as your own agent, your own, I remember spending hours of like just trying to figure out how am I getting massage? What am I doing if I sprain an ankle? I don't have open access to the training room you do as a student athlete. So I was a GA in the academic department, but also a volunteer coach. So I could be around the team and coach and help. And that was as much just, so I think I probably got a pair of shoes. Not that we had a surplus at Missouri State, but then could also train with the team and get ice and use the locker rooms, like those very, 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 very basic things that you have to have. Be in the whirlpool, that kind of stuff. So after that, when Houston left, I floated a little bit, and a good friend of mine, his dad called me up and said, "Hey, why don't you come be a teacher here?" And it's a long story, but the department chair at this high school, he was a friend of mine, my good friend, who I've already referenced here. His name's Clark Hafferty. I spoke with him. He was the first one I told about the Hall of Fame. It was his dad, who was a math teacher and a track coach, and it kind of became a friend and mentor to me as an undergrad, called me up and said, "Hey, the department chair here at the high school where I retired from just passed away, and this is Labor Day weekend. Would you come and help us finish the semester?" Well, at that exact moment in time, I had planned to move to Canada for 3 months because one of my college buddies, Calvin Staples, was up there training with the track club, the same track club that Nate Brennan and the Kerrs. Some really good Canadians up in Kitchener-Waterloo, and then also had already been connected into the Speed River guys. So, Reed Colset and just the crew up there. And so I was going to go just be an illegal immigrant in Canada and hang out for 3 months and train and just be up there for the fall until I figured out what I was going to do, like my next training destination, and spend some time trying to decipher who my next coach would be and like what I would really do. And then instead of moving to Canada, I was literally packing my car when I got the call. I moved to Kansas City and was a high school math teacher with my friend through the fall semester. And then that gave me the opportunity to really look and figure out what the next step was for me, what I wanted to do in terms of how I wanted to answer the question you asked me. Like, how am I going to pay my bills? What am I going to do outside of running? I knew it wasn't full-time teaching yet. At that point in my life, even in the interview with that principal, I said, I always looked at teaching as kind of my retirement job, meaning retirement from whatever dream I was trying to chase, not, the silly, Peter Pan stuff that I was trying to do as an athlete to avoid growing up. I looked at like, well, when I was ready to be a grown up and quote settle down, I would be a high school teacher and coach. And then I took that time and talked with Greg Harger and the Indiana Invaders, and
that is a name I have not thought of for a while. I got to know Greg a little bit through the Invaders, a guy that really was trying to push the envelope and do things differently in track and field. I'm glad you brought that name up, man. I have not thought of that guy in a long time. That's cool.
Yeah. And then years later, when I was in Indianapolis, we reconnected, and he's still doing a lot of like youth cross country and trying to help the city. But
so sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. That was a name from the past there. Yeah.
So I talked to him, and a friend of mine that was guiding me to kind of help me identify options was Mark Mish. At the time, he was coaching at Southwest Baptist in Bolivar, Missouri. He now coaches at University of Colorado, Colorado Springs. So he was giving me some advice, and so I talked to Harger and the Invaders. I reached out to Pete Ray at Zap Fitness, but it just wasn't going to be a good fit in North Carolina, basically because I wasn't good enough to really get any support, and it was going to be an uphill battle for me just to make it work. Not that Pete's not a great guy, just wasn't a good fit for them, probably more than me. And then I talked to Corey Immels at Iowa State as much because I knew of him, had never actually interacted with him, didn't know him personally. I knew of him, but it was home. I'm from Iowa, and I was like, well, if I could move home and if it was going to work, is 80 miles from where I grew up. So that would have been wonderful. Yeah. And then I talked to Bob Brayman at Florida State. He had, Andrew Limoncello and Tom Lancashire were running for Bob, who both were ultimately Olympians in 2008. And then, really tried to explore, basically emailed anybody that had a professional group or a post-collegiate group, like begging for them to consider me. And of everybody, Corey Immels, Greg Harger, and Bob Brayman were the three that expressed the most interest. And then probably interest is a strong word, most willingness to tolerate me in their training group.
Yeah, or willingness to help. You're right.
Yes, right. Willingness to support my fantasy of being an elite level athlete.
The Peter Pan principle, as you put it. I like that.
Yeah. So, they were willing to do that for me. And I remember it very clearly. I was home over Christmas maybe, and I was down to Florida State and volunteer coaching for Bob or volunteer coaching for Corey at Iowa State. And but again, I knew I wanted to be in coaching, but I really wanted to run. I wanted to try and run. And so that's where it was they were willing to help support that fantasy while allowing me to train with the team and have access to the training room and do some of that because I was a volunteer coach. And I did some hill work, and I was out, and it was minus 20 and brutal in Iowa in December. And I just remember it was really, really cold. I remember the hill, and I remember thinking to myself, you know what? I'm going to call Bob Brayman. I'm going to go to Florida.
They did not have that weather in Tallahassee right then and there. That's right.
That's right. And so I moved to Florida the next month, weeks later. And not because Corey wasn't great or that I didn't have a love for Iowa, But Bob is energetic salesman, good man, and he still is a good friend of mine. And I moved down there, and I'll tell you what, I get to be close friends with Ken Harnden, who's at Tennessee now. He I don't want to speak too personally for what Ken shared with me, but he let me stay at his house for months. I mean, weeks turned into 2 months probably. Well, I tried to figure out how the heck I'm going to pay some rent and what I'm going to do. Where am I going to live? Because I was not a professional runner. I was not getting paid anything by anybody, and I was trying to figure that out. So forever indebted to people like Ken, but Ken especially, because not only, I mean, I was like sleeping every night by 9 and like getting up at 6 for multiple runs, very serious about the nutrition, no drinking, none of that. And Ken lives a pretty disciplined life too. And where we have a major intersection is an undying love for track and field. So we would just sit around every night after dinner, and he'd let me just make myself at home, literally like cook some dinner at his house, do whatever I'm doing. Then we'd sit either at the dining table or in his living room. And just, if he wasn't recruiting, because that guy works, at least at that time, I don't know, I'm sure he and the team at Tennessee still do it, but he was just on the ground. And I learned so much from just conversations like we're having right now with Ken, and just how he went about building his training group. Walter Dix was there at the time, and like tremendous success. And the relationship he had with other coaches on staff, Dennis Noble, Harless Metters, the people that were there at the time, certainly, I've already mentioned Bob, just to be around them and see how they coach and see what they do. I left, and then they won those 3 national titles in a row. And it's like, well, then at Iowa State, while I was at Iowa State, everyone's like, you need to leave here too. Like, get out of here. We'll start winning. That was kind of a joke. But being around those guys and seeing what they were doing and how they did, just conducted themselves and conducted the business of Florida State track and field, like opened my eyes. And, Bob Bremen hustles, or he certainly did then. And I know he still does, I'm sure, because it's in his DNA. It's not like it was something he was trying for the first time as a hustler.
It's a lot of like catching lightning in a bottle, they say, of this, when you have special times together, a lot of things have to come together for that. We talked about that with Harry Mara in past episodes about this time with Ashton and his, at the time, girlfriend and fiance Bree, now wife, at Oregon with Harry. It was just this real special time. Same thing, that time that you're talking about there at Florida State with Bob and Harless and Ken, etc. They just had they had a real special time. It's hard to keep that window open, to be real honest with you, but they had an extended time of a lot of championships and a lot of records there. And I've gotten to know Blake. I've gotten to know Bob over the past few years now, having doing some business choosing Gill Athletics down there. That he is he's a go-getter, man. Let me tell you what, do not mistake that they are not right now winning championships like they were back then. Don't mistake that for Bob taking his foot off the gas. Let me tell you what, they will get back up there real soon, no doubt.
Yeah, he really, what I learned from Bob, probably more than anything, but a lot of stuff. I mean, for one, he's just fun. He's a goofball. I mean, he's motivated and a hustler, but he's a goofball. But what I learned from him was how good coaches think like entrepreneurs. You're always inventing, and certainly talking about like training techniques. I don't mean it, but I mean that's when you think of coaching, and you go to the coaches convention and you hear that's what most of those talks seem to be about, and people talk a lot about like their technical knowledge and how they're an expert on body positions, shin angles, so on and on and on. You hear all these catchphrases that are very important. Bob, I'm talking about hosting a meet and like hustling T-shirts off the side to fund the program or something that isn't inside his budget, and like doing things that are innovative. I mean, when he started it at South Florida, like a cross-state relay that raised some money for some charity, raised some money for the program, raised awareness, just things that you don't think of when you are, focusing on training and coaching and recruiting, which are all vital. But then so I was there for long enough to know, and I guess this is the best way to say it, long enough to know that it wasn't the best fit for me. And just personally, I think there's something that everybody will find when you are on your own for the first time in life. Certainly, I would not have made it 6 months if it hadn't been for Ken Harden and Bob Brayman and their generosity. Bob very regularly taking me out to lunch and supporting me and connecting me to others in town and networking me. I mean, he offered some very generous things to me very personally that I'll never forget, that I try and pay forward, as best as I can. But then I knew, it's the first time where you're away from everybody you've ever known. Like, I showed up in Tallahassee with my car full of my junk, my things that I thought were important, books mostly, and then my dog, and that was it. I didn't know anybody else in all of Tallahassee. And you're there, and then you don't have any money, and you're like trying to figure out how to take things to the next level. And I was the only person doing it the way I was doing it, meaning like trying to travel to those meets after the ACC championships. It's like I'm almost entirely on my own trying to figure that out. And it was tough go. And then I didn't have that ability to see friends, family, or others that I knew, So at the end of that, I knew one thing. It's like, all right, called Corey Immels back. Hey man, would you still be interested in like tolerating me in Ames? And he's still to this day a close friend and mentor, someone that isn't the most outgoing person in the coaching world to like network and build that. But to me personally, he's invested countless hours and shared so much with me. And then, he's the reason why I had big breakthroughs as a post-collegiate, because my first year with Houston as a GA, and then the next year at Florida State running for Bob and with Tom and Andrew and the crew, not just those guys, but, and some of those guys that I got to know then, Chris Nickinson, that was at Florida State then, he's one of the hot shots at Runner Space now. So we stay in touch. I see him at U.S. championships and everywhere all the time. And so it's like we don't talk much about our Florida State time together, but we're kind of maintained a friendship for 15 years based on that. But then at Iowa State is really where I spent 3 years there, and it felt at home. And I came in at the exact time that Corey and his previous volunteer, Matt Helbig, had brought in a really strong freshman class. So, Kyle Ewell stands out as a guy who his freshman year, he was a U.S. champion. And on the women's side, his girlfriend at the time, Lisa Cole, was like not great then. But man, I remember, I'll tell you the story where I knew Lisa Cole was just going to be absolutely ferocious. She was doing some drills at regionals her freshman year. Kyle, as a true freshman, was second in the Midwest region. Like an incredible performance by just a kid from Des Moines Roosevelt to just go out and like finish second in the Midwest region as a true freshman. It's like, wow, that's when I knew that kid was something special. He had something I did not have. But that same day, Lisa, she sprained her ankle doing drills. So much so that when I saw her, like before the race, so much so that afterwards she's having trouble like getting her shoe off because it's like swollen up over her shoe. Wow. But she ran the race and finished all region as a true freshman with basically a foot that she wasn't going to be able to run on for a month because of it.
You talk about the definition of tough and grit. That's it right there. Holy cow.
And those two, very lovingly but very competitively brought it out of each other because they were both that same. She's from Fort Dodge, Iowa, super great people. And I just watched it happen where like, if he was upset after a race, she knew she needed to do better too. And it was this just wonderful like growth that then all of a sudden by the time they graduated, he's still an all Big 12 guy and a national level distance runner. Well, she's the collegiate record holder, like
right.
She turned into something even more special that's like you couldn't have ever even projected. So to be around that, my second year at Iowa State, the men's team qualified for nationals for the first time in 11 years or something like that. And so it was like this big really success and growth to that program. And at the time, I got to certainly spend holidays with family, be around. And so during that time, while I was volunteer coaching for 2 years, and then in the third year I was full-time recruiting coordinator and coach, I was also an athlete. And so training with the team, but then running the Drake relays. I went to Europe one of those seasons, maybe. Yeah. Well, just got the chance to run and ran well enough. That's when I ran sub 4. And I had
That
finished.
at Iowa State indoor?
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah,
At the
that's a
last chance
great
meet.
track. Yeah.
It is. Yeah. And that was back when the NCAA still had a last chance meet.
Yeah, that's right.
And it was like a week after I'd finished 4th at the U.S. Indoor Championships. And I just knew I was so ready. Yeah. I mean, the 3 guys that beat me, their names that most people will know. Matt Tegenkamp won.
Yeah.
Chris Solinsky was 2nd.
Yeah.
Then 3rd was Sean Graham, who coaches at Liberty now. And at the time, he'd run, I think already he'd run like 13:16 or 13:21. Or I mean, he was 13:20 type guy. And I was probably, at the time, had never run over 14 flat maybe, you know.
Wow. And so you got to compete at Drake as a elite runner, post-collegiate as well. Did you win any Drake titles or?
I won in college. I won in 2000 in the University 1500.
So you got to race with the Drake flag. That's awesome, man. I love that. That's one of the greatest. I don't know if they do that at other meets because I don't go to other meets. But I love that tradition of just celebrating the win and actually bringing the fans to the track in that sense that, you know, you get the high five and the pictures and stuff. So that's just such an iconic portion of track and field. That's awesome. You did race one of your races, I believe, if I have my history of you correctly, you did lose to a pretty famous runner. You were 2nd maybe to some guy named Alan Webb.
Yeah, to say that I lost to Alan would probably be an insult to him.
Yeah, you know? No, I was building up to that because I said lost, but what did he do in that race?
He ran the fastest mile ever run in the month of April in the world. I'm pretty sure that's what he did. And I think it was something, I'd have to look back. I should know it. I should know it because I'm the director of the meet now. And it's like this, it's one of the favorite memories that people remember because he was such a huge star.
Huge.
He had not yet set the American record. He did later that summer of 3:47.
Wow.
But he ran, I want to say 3:53, maybe 3:50. Well, let me think. He beat me by 11 seconds, I think, and I ran 4:02. So maybe he ran 3:51. You know, like I think that's what it was.
That is so hard to hear. You run 4:02 and a guy still beats you by 11. Like, holy cow, man. That's amazing. Yeah. That's amazing.
And it was just one of those weird things because Brian Brown, the director at the time, had set it up with pacers, you know, Moises Joseph, who was a Haitian guy that was a stud runner, like probably a 145, 147, 800-meter runner.
Huge. When I was coaching, Joseph was in high school, and I'd go to the state meet in Florida for recruiting. And let me tell you what, when that kid ran, the fans were in it. There was a lot of cultural and the drums and the bells and stuff like that. You knew when he was running because his family and support base was front and center, baby. It was awesome to watch him. He was a huge stud. Did he go to University of Miami or did he go to Florida?
I would have said Florida, but could be Miami.
No, I think maybe it was Florida. Maybe it was from Miami area and then went to school in Gainesville. Yeah, maybe that's what it was. Yeah.
And then at that point in time, I think they were training together up by Virginia. Or in Virginia, like kind of in Alan's hometown, I think.
That's right. He's from Virginia. Okay.
And I think that's what they were doing. But even if they weren't training together, it was kind of his preferred rabbit. And so he took him through like 1,000 meters, way faster than my PR was, I'm sure, like no doubt, and way ahead of me. And then the trouble was, from the very beginning, they were gone. And then the trouble was, even from the first 150 meters, there was nobody else that wanted to be in second. Like nobody else even wanted to run just the way the field kind of broke.
Yeah.
So I found myself running basically a 4:02 time trial by myself.
On an island there.
Yeah, and nobody cared because everybody was watching Alan, and it was like kind of this weird anticlimax of like, well, Alan's up there and I'm back here. And, you know, everybody has asked me, since I moved back and I'm the director here, people have asked me for that story. And it's always like, well, you know, hey, what was it like to race or, you know, to race Alan Webb or what, do you remember that day? And I'm like, everybody in the crowd got a much better view of the race than I did because I was too far back.
You were just soloing.
Yeah.
That's funny, man. Well, let's move a little bit forward. That was at Iowa State. And then I believe, did you go from Iowa State to UAB?
Indirectly. So at the end of that 2008, I missed the Olympic trials for the second time. And it was just this kind of like frustrating, gut-wrenching, like 28 years old, put a lot of time and energy into the coaching side of it. And I'd kind of moved up to not kind of, I had moved up to the 5,000, which I probably should have done a lot earlier in my career. And although I kind of had a sense that I was in that 1335 or 1340 shape, I only ran 1346. And so I missed the trials. But then I looked down the list of the people that ran, and of the people that qualified, I think at that point in time in 2008, only Ryan Kirkpatrick had a full-time job. Like everyone else is like just running. By and large, they're with one of those groups that I already mentioned, or they had a deal, and so they were in a situation that they weren't forced to like be in an office for 40 hours or like work. And when I was at Iowa State, Corey can tell you, or Travis Hartke, who was there with me, or any of the coaches, John DeGotta, or Ronnie Williams, Pete Herbert, any of those people I worked with there, they could tell you it was like, I'm pretty competitive. And I was all in, like hours and hours and hours. And then by the time I got to the end of 2008, I just was like, well, I'm really only going to have my shelf life as an athlete, that window's closing. And is this the job that I'm going to give this up for right now? So I had a heart to heart with Corey, and it's not probably damaged our friendship and professional relationship in the short term, just because it's like, man, I'm leaving, and not for another job. Like I'm just leaving to go be Peter Pan, like the guy I showed up here as, and it was kind of foolish. I moved to Colorado Springs, which is wonderful. I don't regret that. Coached some high school, got into some online coaching just to pay rent. Was living with friends Tommy Neal and Nate Jenkins, the three of us, in a 2-bedroom apartment that probably was $400 or $500 a month total. Cardboard for furniture and lawn chairs. Like cardboard with a blanket over was the table. I'm not joking. Yeah, that's what we did.
Oh,
yeah,
wow.
like really, truly, and just all in, all three of us.
Yeah.
Nobody was making any money. I had a deal with Saucony, but they dropped me after 2008, so I was kind of on my own trying to make this go. Scott Simmons was generous in coaching me, not charging me. He was at Queens in Charlotte, and I would fly down for from altitude to sea level stints and stay with Jeff Goddett, and I trained with Michael Crouch, who was just a stud athlete. Great group of people there. But the way I dove into it, it was just there was only two possible outcomes: massive breakthrough, and I feel like I was on the verge of that, or injury, like career-ending type
massive
injury.
breakdown.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I was on the cusp of the breakthrough part, but I found the breakdown first. So then I knew I needed surgery. I'd been identified that I needed to repair an athletic bulge, like a sports hernia, and had to have an adductor release done. But I didn't have any money, no health insurance, like broke. I mean, you've already gotten the picture, like lawn chairs and cardboard. Kurt Thomas, another mutual friend of ours, called me up, and I remember, so it was 2009, and I was in Eugene for U.S. championships for some reason. I was not running, but I was in there, and I remember having a phone conversation with Kurt about it, and I was just very blunt up front. Like, I just don't think Birmingham, Alabama is where I want to be. Like I'd already tried Tallahassee. I knew that it was like far enough from home that it wasn't going to be home. But then I actually did some research on it. It's like, wow, that place could be pretty good.
Great city.
Cool city. I still love not just visiting, but I owned a home there. I got there when I did that homework enough to realize, like, you could be pretty good. Like there's some good opportunity. Ray Stanfield, my predecessor there, had won some Conference USA titles, and you start looking at it and go, this is, while I was there, we had one season where we had 3 different women's teams, maybe it was 4 different women's teams, all ranked in the top 25 in the country. It was, Rice, SMU, Tulsa were all really good the whole time I was there. And we were pretty good. We finished, the women there that did a great job. Kurt, great guy. I'm still close friends with him. And he gave me the autonomy to do what I wanted, to coach the way I wanted, to go to the meets I wanted. So it was a special time.
I always got to give shout out to Kurt Thomas. He was one of the first podcast episodes we had here. He's one of my first guinea pigs. I think he was episode number 6, so you got to go check him out. And you'll know more about Kurt and I's story of how he and I know each other from Mississippi State days, a long time ago. Which I was going to ask you. So how did Kurt know you? Was that through Houston as well?
We met at Houston's wedding. When Houston and Megan got married, we were there, hung out. And I think that maybe when I first met Jill, and so Jill and Kurt, Kurt's now wife, and they're just cool people, really great. Cool. And I think she was hopeful that Kurt would find some friends. I say that jokingly.
That still hasn't worked out for her. I hope Kurt doesn't listen to this now.
No, it's great. And so we stayed in touch. Actually, Jill kind of kept us connected for a while. And then, probably Kurt probably got my name again, kind of came to the front of his mind. But he probably just asked Houston, "Hey, who would you call?" And he's like, "Well, I know Blake's unemployed. Blake's not doing anything. Call him."
Well, let's keep moving forward here. We're starting to be on borrowed time here a little bit because
sorry about that.
No, it's all good, man. These are great stories, and very much like I still have a part 2 transition one day with Kava Tolbert. We only got an hour when I first did Kava on the podcast a few months ago. This may be something we do with you as well, because I don't want to rush the story and the stories, because they are fascinating, and that's exactly what we want to bring with the Gill Athletics Connections podcast, is these stories. We want to be able to capture and kind of archive these things so that they kind of live in posterity, if you will. So love where we're going with this direction with your story and your timeline here. So obviously you were at UAB for a couple of years and did real well. And you're right, that conference is tough, and it was tough back then as well with Steve Gulley's teams there at Tulsa. It's really actually quite amazing. Did you go from there to Penn?
Yep.
So, and when you went to Penn up in the Ivy League, did you go there because you worked with the Penn Relays and coaching, correct? Did you go there for one or the other, or how did that work out?
Yeah, just coaching. But then when Penn, and we're getting back to that point a little bit more at Drake. But certainly when Brian and Natasha, the head coach, is married to the director of the Drake Relays here at Drake, the track staff worked very closely with the Drake Relays staff. And at Penn, it wasn't that level of closeness. Nobody was married to Dave Johnson, obviously. But Dave empowered us to be involved, and then also did have key roles that he did count on track staff to help out with. So like Tony Tanisi, the longtime throws coach, was involved heavily down in the throwing area, in part because the throws venue is outside of the stadium. So, Dave can't be 2 places at the same time. And then I got the glamorous job of being in charge of the hurdle crew for a couple years. So, just fun, because I love track and I don't mind work. And it's like finding kids on the team that want to have credentials to be right down the infield during the USA versus the World. Yes, I'll let you come down there with me and have the credential then, but you're going to have to be there Friday from 8 a.m. to 10 a.m. while we're doing the high school 400 hurdles or whatever, like all of the route shuttle hurdles and all of this. And so I had that job. And then the job of identifying like when and how. That used to be where they had that rail down the middle between lane 4 and 5. Right. Then on the back stretch, when you have the lanes 1 through 4 move out to 5, and then lanes 5 through 8 move down to 5. Mm-hmm. So you kind of have a dual merge. There's a rail that you have to have for ratification purposes and sanctioning purposes. Well, that rail was mobile. So then as soon as the athletes went by, we put it down. So it's like that little nuanced stuff. You got to have somebody that pays attention and that you can count on. So I just did some of that stuff. And then in my second year, I got to help I did assemble the field for the Invite Mile, which was my first time of like kind of doing the elite athlete or kind of being on that side of it. And so, I got to wear a blue hat, which that's where I kind of learned the structure, the hierarchy of officials at Penn. It's fascinating. It's something I've kind of replicated and duplicated or rip off and copy and place at Drake a little bit, so that then your entry-level officials at Penn, they would all wear red hats. Well, you got elevated to a blue hat if a crew reported to you. So I got to wear a blue hat at the Penn Relays. Year one, red hat. Year two, blue hat.
I didn't know there was a secret society to hat wearing at Penn. Interesting.
Yeah, well, it's cool. And the reason, actually, what I learned there is that hierarchy allows, you don't even need to know people's names. You can walk up. You don't even have to know them in person prior to that day. But if you walk up to the long jump, don't ask a red hat a question. Go to a blue hat because they're running the crew. And you don't even need to know who that is. You don't even have to ask for, hey, who do I need to know about X? What flight are you on? So it builds an event to event or area to area familiarity that you just kind of know who's running the area to get the question you need answered.
Helps speed up communication and therefore speeds up the event, which needs every help it can get because it's just so big. That kind of goes with my philosophy that I think everybody should wear name tags in this world. It would just help to automatically just walk up to a stranger and be like, oh, hey, Bob. So,
right.
Yeah, that's interesting. So how did the transition from Penn to Indianapolis occur? And the reason I ask is because at Indy, you were I don't know what the official title was, I'm going to call it director, but you're the director of the Indianapolis Monumental Marathon. That's a much more business type job inside of our world of track and field versus like a coaching, it's strictly, you weren't coaching when you were in Indianapolis as you were in Penn. What made that transition? Why was that interesting to you to get out of coaching in that respect?
Well, so in part, the circumstances that change, the circumstances at Penn changed very quickly from the time I arrived to a year later, in fact. So in my first, I think it was probably 6 months, I was hired by 3 people. Our senior women's administrator, Mary DeStanislaw, William Roth, who was an associate athletic director in charge of development, but had been a track coach. He'd coached at Virginia and at Tulane. So he knew track, and he was a smart guy, and he'd helped raise a lot of money, and they were transitioning sports supervision from Mary to William. And then also Charlie Powell, who had been the longtime coach.
Yeah.
Within 6 months of my arrival, or maybe 8 months, I don't know the exact timeline, but within my first year for sure, Charlie left to go take on the big challenge of Spire. Mm-hmm. Mary left for a huge opportunity at Marquette in Wisconsin, and William Roth left to become the head AD at Oberlin, where Vin had to stop. So
yeah.
the three people that brought me in and had promised this kind of new vision with me at the center of it, because Penn at that point, or that still now, is the oldest Division I track and field program in the country. Collegiate track and field in the United States started with a dual meet between NYU and Penn. And it's like, that's college track. Not just the Penn relays that are the oldest annual large meet like that. And so it's like at the core of this history. Well, they added women's track and field later in the game. And until I was there, men and women's track and field had never had, maybe the best way to say this, the head coaches had always been separate positions. There'd never been a unified program. So that was the intention of me going there. So in my first year, I went from an assistant coach for both the men and the women to being the head cross country coach for both men and women. Wow. So it was a big step. And then I had my own admission spots in some portion of then I was reporting to administration. And then it was intended that then, both Gwen Harris and Charlie Powell, that they were not in their early days of their career, that as they both transitioned on, that my role would be elevated to something larger that would be like what Dolan is in now. Steve Dolan has done a wonderful job, and truly the right person. But then with all of that transition, with Charlie leaving, Mary leaving, William Roth leaving, the entire vision changed as a department. And to be very frank, I got there and did a wonderful job of changing culture, and I really stayed true to that and poured myself into that time and the athletes and in recruiting. But we weren't very good. No fault of the athletes, no fault, and I don't think there was much more I could have done to change it, both on the men and women's side. When I was the head coach for the men and women at the University of Pennsylvania, we were 8th in the Ivy League out of 8 teams on both sides. So they were not in a situation that when Charlie left, Gwen was leaving, and then Mary and William, who had both helped identify me and bring me in from the beginning, they were not in a situation that they were in a position to name me interim director or anything. It was just like, hey, concurrently, a friend of mine who had been asking me for 18 months to consider this job in Indianapolis. His name's John Little, terrific, passionate supporter of track and field. I got to know him. We met at a U.S. championship when we were both running post-collegiately in New York. He had qualified for the Olympic marathon trials in New York. So at the 2007 U.S. 8K championships, we hit it off, and then and we ran for the same club for a while, Kansas City Smoke. So this sustained relationship and friendship. And then when I used to go run meets in Indianapolis, I would stay with his family because I didn't have money for a hotel, and they were always very generous. So I've got to be close with John, and they were looking for an executive director for this new event. And the first time he hired anyone, he called me up to ask if I'd be interested. And I was like, you know what? I'm at Penn. This is where I'm at. Well, then my predecessor in Indianapolis left after some short number of months, 6 months or a year. And then they were having a hard time finding the right replacement. So that position had been vacant for some number of months while this less than ideal transition was taking place in Pennsylvania or in Philadelphia. So he kept pursuing it. And what I later found out was he went to the rest of the board. And he was on the board of directors of the Indianapolis Monumental Marathon and said, hey, listen. And they needed a new board president. So they needed new leadership even on the board of directors side. He went to the rest of the board and said, hey, listen, if you hire Blake Boldon, I'll be the president of the board. So like he went over and above, put his name on me. Yeah. What he didn't tell them was I had never done marketing. I'd never done nonprofit leadership. I'd never sold sponsorships. I had, never done anything outside of college coaching or just running myself. He just knew I loved the sport and he believed in me. And he put his name on it and took a huge chance and gave me an opportunity. So then I went after it and, named some conditions that I didn't feel like they would meet, saying I had an assistant in Indianapolis or in Pennsylvania and said, hey, if I leave Penn, he's not what is he going to do? He's a volunteer coach for me. He moved here. He'd been the coach at Dakota Wesleyan in South Dakota and had come to Philadelphia from Mitchell, South Dakota. Casey Collins, wonderful man. And I didn't know what his job would be, but I said, I'll only come if I can hire him as the second employee. I didn't even know what the job was, but I knew he would do it.
Were you trying not to get hired?
Well, I didn't necessarily want to leave college coaching, and I felt good about, even though it was less than certain, where I was at Penn. I was like, well, it's still Penn. It's still all of that. And I had just poured a lot of time and energy into it. But then when John and the board of directors in Indianapolis said, yeah, we'll meet all of the financial terms.
Oops.
Would you hire this guy? I was like, let's go. Shows how desperate they were, I guess, because it was June. I started June 18th, and we were way behind. And the event was November. We were 20% behind year over year on registration numbers. Some sponsorship stuff was left pending. We hadn't ordered some medals. It was time. And they needed somebody to come in and just pour themselves into it. And I had no idea what I was doing. No clue. But it was the best way to learn.
Now, you learned on the job really well because you took that marathon series, and it was a series, right? Like you guys did a 5K, 10K, and team marathon, or you added that.
Yeah. So when I got there, it was a 5K, half marathon, and marathon the first Saturday in November. Within 2 years, we created the Monumental Mile, which is in June. Then we merged with and acquired the Indianapolis Marathon, which we were never direct competitors, but the brand confusion. You can't really have two marathons. We've talked about it a bunch over the years. So that was a natural move. So I learned mergers and acquisitions, learned marketing, and we grew from the 60th largest marathon in the U.S. in 2011 or 12 to by the time I left 4.5 years later to be number 15. So really,
so what kind of numbers does that translate to from 60th largest to almost top 10?
Yeah, in terms of, and that's only by marathon finishers, was probably from a couple thousand to 5,000 or 6,000. So pretty significant growth. I mean, wow. You work in business, and like our annual revenue. My first year was less than or just around 600,000. My final year, we were projecting for the next budget year, 2.1 million. So we had done a lot of growth,
That's
new
awesome.
events, big significant, signed a title sponsor, C&O Financial Group there in Indianapolis, which, you kind of I talked earlier about Bob Brayman and his entrepreneurial spirit, but to learn sponsorship sales well enough to get a company to come on and use a non-consumer facing brand in a title sponsorship, it was a big success for us. And it was
Was it monumental?
it was monumental.
There you go. I got to teach you to learn how to use these words a little better. These breakthrough to break down, and now that what you did was monumental.
It was good.
So how many years were you there?
From June of 2012 until November of 16. So four and a half.
4.5 going, pushing 5 years, and again, learning on the job. So you learned everything from the marketing side to promotions to how to order and design medals, everything from the nuts and bolts all the way to mergers and acquisitions, taking to successful marathons and bringing them together and running that as a series as well. So what at that point you said you were top 15 for marathon in the country, and there's a lot of marathons out there. That's no small feat. But then something special opened up. Our mutual friend, Mr. Brian Brown, left the Drake Relays to go to the University of Missouri, which means Drake needed a director of Drake Relays. What was that like? I know you and I have talked a lot in the past. This was a dream job scenario for you.
Right.
What was it like when you first heard the news that the opportunity was available, that Brian had left?
Yeah. So I know I've taken more time than we had discussed, but it's a long story because years prior, 2 years prior, I was really enjoying the success in Indianapolis, and it allowed me to find other passions. Not to say I was particularly good at it, but I got in that time, Lonnie Green at Purdue gave me the chance to get into public address announcing, and really found that I got to if I did a fall marathon, I got to just hang around the track a little bit and be at track meets and do fun things in the sport. And so I was really feeling at home there. And so I already referenced Corey Immel's friend, mentor, someone who I've stayed in touch with over the years, and he still does a lot for me in terms of offering advice and counsel. We were just catching up. He was in Indianapolis, staying out by the airport because he had brought some athletes from Boise State to race a high-performance meet at IU, down in Bloomington. So great chance for us to get some dinner, a beer, catch up. We were just hanging out, and he said, what are you going to do? Is this what you want to do? And I'm like, yeah, this is, I owned a home, had kind of really grounded myself, was on the board of my neighborhood association, felt at home in Indianapolis, and with USATF in Indy, the NCAA in Indy. It's like, well, I don't know where else I'd really want to live to feel connected at the highest level of the sport. And in Indianapolis, we went from one employee working from home to a staff of 6 working in the heart of downtown. We found this office space, and how did I hire those people? Oh, they're my friends. I just got to – when do you ever get to just hire people that you know and trust and know to their core as someone that you don't even know what necessarily the job's going to be, but they're a good person and they're going to be really great. And then you build a team. Yes, it's so much fun. And truly, we actually, the group of the 4 core people that really started that kind of team, we had a Zoom the other day. During that time of my life, every day I would walk in. I like to work late. I'll start at 9:30 and then go to 7. So by the time I would get there as the executive director, the other 3 staff people are already in the office working. And so I would just walk in every day and try and scare them or just goof around, have fun, a Michael Scott bad boss kind of stuff. But every day I would slap a desk and say best team in the marathon business, and that's how we would start every single day.
At 9:30.
Whatever it was. Maybe it was 10, Mike. Why do you care?
Just wanted to make sure that was the right time.
Yeah, on an early day, okay? So that was the spirit of what we were doing. And we still joke around best team in the marathon business, even though we don't work together anymore. Because it kind of it was the culture we were creating. We were all just all in, it was really fun. And then so Corey asked me, what are you going to do? Is this it for you? I'm like, maybe. There's 2 jobs that I would consider, like a similar role to what I have at Chicago Marathon, because I really admire Kerry Pinkowski, Mike Nishi. I mean, it's a world marathon major. I mean, come on, it's amazing. I don't know if I have that same passion for that now. I mean, just seeing those guys, and Chicago's a big city, and it's a lot. But the other opportunity is director of the Drake Relays. If Brian Brown were to ever have left, I was like, man, that's the thing that I would really be interested in finding out more, like really see myself. It'd be the one chance I could get to move home. I already mentioned my mom's 72. She lives here, and it's like chance to all my family lives here, so chance to be back. Well, then fast forward a year or two go by, and I'm sitting at dinner with my girlfriend at the time, and we're just enjoying having a conversation. And I get a text that says, your job's about to open up. And I'm like, well, has he heard something from the board of directors?
Yeah, right, I'm getting fired.
What's going on from Corey? And I'm like, what do you mean? And he's like, well, tomorrow. And I don't know how he knew, but sometimes these coaching jobs, like I think it was widely known, and I just wasn't involved. I just wasn't even in tune with anything in college coaching.
Yeah, you're out of the NCAA essentially.
Yeah. And look, except for the people like Lonnie Green, who'd call me to announce a track meet. Like, and I went down and Steve Keith at Vanderbilt, I got to announce, and some other, not just at Purdue, but some other people had brought me down, and I got a chance to learn and do that. So anyway, well, I didn't sleep that night because I spent the rest of the night writing a cover letter, updating. I hadn't touched my resume in 4 years, So I update a resume, write the cover letter, then brainstorm neurotically every single person that I might reach out to that would call the athletic director at Drake on my behalf, including Mike Cunningham, including actually the then lieutenant governor of the state of Iowa, who I knew had a relationship with Drake. She's from my hometown. We went to church together all the time growing up.
Wow.
So she's now the governor, and I texted her, hey, Kim, would you mind being a reference for me? She's like, yeah, what can I do? Well, would you call on my behalf? So, that's how committed I was. If I knew somebody that had a connection to Drake, because I wanted it, and it was the thing that I wanted.
Calling in the favors.
Every favor I had, I called them in to put myself in a position to interview.
Well, I tell you what, Blake, this story that we're getting into here is really special for you, of course, but also for me. You did involve me in the process, which I'm so grateful for. And it also then leads to your leadership over the past. Is this year 4 for Drake Relays director?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
So through 4 years, and obviously this year was a different than most years, and you guys did some really cool, innovative, interesting, creative things this year. And of course, there's going to be Drake Relays next year, and the next year, and next year, and next year. I want to make sure that we honor that and give it enough time. So I'm actually we're gonna pause here. I know you've got, you're big time Drake Relays director. You already got other meetings lined up. So I want to respect that, but I do want to make sure that we give the time necessary to talk about this passion of Drake Relays. And to say it's special for both of us, because I've given you some stories. I have a big part of my heart for Drake Relays. When the 100th anniversary went down, was it 11 years ago now? Was this supposed to be 11?
Yeah.
As the equipment vendor and sponsor for the Drake Relays, I had a couple of extra. We do the bibs every year. I had a couple extra of the 100 bib done up, and then had them framed in a kind of an artsy thing. And I think everybody at Guild knows this. So obviously I gave one to Drake Relays. It should be somewhere in your office and things.
It's in my office. Yep.
Okay, good. The other one is at Gil. It's on our wall there. And then I had an extra one made up for me. It's actually in my basement. My wife she put 3 things up in our basement to kind of symbolize my life. The first one is a Troy State emblem head that she cross-stitched, because that's huge to my life. The middle frame is the poker chips from when I played poker and things like that. That's a big part of my life. And then to represent track and field in general, the third frame is the Drake 100 frame. So in our house,
That's cool.
It's a big deal for a guy who didn't grow up in Iowa, certainly didn't run in Iowa, but did get to coach. at the Drake Relays, and then have done some great USA championships and NCAA events, and of course the great Drake Relays every year. It is special to me. So we're going to pause only if you will agree to come back one day, and let's do a part 2 and pick up right here about how you got to Drake. And then really, I want to spend a lot of time on what's next for Drake, because I know you are always thinking about the next thing of how to enhance and elevate this great event that we have.
I will agree to return if you can provide evidence that more than just Kurt Thomas and Houston Franks download this episode.
All right. Hey, so I'll put a challenge out there to listeners. So if you're listening to this, you're already in the challenge, but that means you've got to share this episode. Let's make this one of our top 10 episodes. That's a hard thing to do now.
Oh, yeah.
Guests like Harry Mara. Harry Mara did a 3-part series, by the way. So I'm not asking much of you to do 2 parts.
Well, if so he's got episodes 1, 2, and 3, and Mike Holloway's 4, or Mike may be in the top 3 there. I know Mike. A lot of people listen to Mike.
His was just released, so he's climbing up. He is top 10 for sure. But yeah, Harry Mara is actually 1, 2, and like 5 for him for part 3. But again, 1 and 2, he's just, and it's like 1 and 2, and like it's a little bit like your race with Alan Webb. It's 1 and 2, and then it's a little solo race back there in 3, 2, 10, which it should be though, because Harry Mara is just absolutely legend. So Blake, thank you so much for your time today. Thank you to your dogs who were minimal distractions.
That's new.
You might want to check. They make sure they're still in the house somewhere.
Right.
They're still all accounted for. But I can't say thank you enough for being here with us today, but also all the things that you do for the Drake Relays. One of the things that we want to make sure we're bringing to the audience through this podcast is not just our great track and field coaches that we have out there, the Harry Maras, Mike Holloways, Houston Franks, we mentioned, Kurt Thomas. Certainly we want to and will continue to bring those stories, but we certainly want to make sure we're bringing the people, I call them behind the scenes. They don't maybe necessarily get the press because you're not at NCAA championships winning titles, but you're putting on, as the relays director, one of the most important meets in the country. So definitely appreciate you sharing your growth story up to this point. Can't wait for part 2 to now. Let's talk about how you got to Drake Relays, but also what's it take? What does a Drake Relays director do? What's it take to put on a meet of this caliber? And then again, would love to talk about what's in the future, because I know you guys are always evolving in the positive. So thank you so much again for being here today.
Thanks, Mike. Thanks for having me. Great to catch up with you.
Absolutely. I for that challenge of making this one of the top episodes, I'm going to rely on you to make sure Corey and Kurt and those guys all know that you are on the podcast.
You know it.
All right, man. Well, I look forward to part 2. Thank you so much.
Yeah, absolutely.